Good morning. This is Jason Dean at Film Fanatic. Back at it again. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Wednesday, the night and day before Turkey Day. So I'm assuming a lot of people have a little bit more free time to kind of hang out and get ready to stuff themselves to oblivion because that's my goal and my plan. So, yeah, hope everyone's doing good. And thanks again for everybody and their support and, making this whole crazy thing that I really love doing and this whole like project that is known as Film Fanatic to, it's been evolving and growing over the last few months. It's mostly been centered on doing these videos and live reviews. So for the Film Fanatic channel, so really appreciate people checking out the videos and everything. Everything overall has been growing more and more, and it's been a blast. I'm learning as I go, trying to bring a diverse amount of content and movies, but still primarily sticking to horror and science fiction, particularly in the world of particularly in the murky world of exploitation. So that's what I love. There's a couple of guys that I'm friends with on Facebook, and they also have a lot of the same tastes that I have, and we have a lot of commonality. We've had a couple of discussions about certain movies, and recently, one guy in particular, Ryan Lowe, who I've corresponded a little bit on Facebook with, and he's really a hardcore film or fellow film fanatic, particularly with a lot of horror films. And he had posted something about this movie called Habit that came out in the early '90s, late '80s, and it's called Habit, and it's this really obscure, pretty underground horror film that came out, and it was directed by Larry Fenderson, who I'm a huge fan of his work. Larry Fenderson is kind of a very he's definitely an underground filmmaker. He's a director. He's a producer. He started his own company called Glass Eye Pix quite a few years ago, around the time that Habit had come out, and he came out of. He's based in New York City, and he came out of the uh, that kind of world of as far as making independent films in New York City, particularly around horror films, very low budget. And he's a really great example of a totally like self-made man, and created his own company, Glass Eye Pix, and they went on to basically put together this roster of different directors that various independent horror film directors, and he through his company Glass Eye Pix, they distribute a lot of these films, and he's really made some huge waves over the years, and very inspiring. And I remember reading early interviews with him about how he went about putting together his company and how he essentially made these movies and had the will to kind of back these projects with like very little money or no money at all, and no help from the outside world. So he just really, I don't know, he had this incredible amount of focus and determination, and overall he just had this passion for 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 being involved in the horror genre, and also trying to, you know, out of his love for horror, he decided to really, to build this company, Glass Eye Pix, and to try to push that form of filmmaking, into a contemporary light, given, trying to give it a fresh new look, or bring in new blood. And he's directed a whole bunch of movies since then. But like I was saying, Ryan Lowe had posted a thing about Habit, which is a movie I never hear I never hear anybody ever mention, and it's a vampire movie, and I think it's one of the greatest vampire movies ever made. Super low budget. It's a very interesting movie because it really deals with facets of addiction, alcohol or drug addiction, and he kind of correlates that into the aesthetic around a vampire, and it's really great. It's an amazing movie, super underrated. I think that movie, Habit, directed by Larry Fenderson, and also another movie which I feel is also probably the most underrated vampire movie and overlooked vampire movie is a movie called The Addiction by Abel Ferrara. Abel Ferrara is a kind of a legendary underground director in New York. He is probably most well known for a movie he did with Harvey Keitel called Bad Lieutenant, which is such an amazing movie, super gritty. He's also a fellow New Yorker. Kind of similar. They both have similar aesthetics behind their filmmaking. But he did a movie with Christopher Walken, uh, who plays a vampire in this movie called The Addiction, and it came out actually not that maybe a few years or so before The Habit had come out. These are both pretty old school films, but to me they're two of the easily on my top tier list of favorite vampire movies. Those movies are definitely in that list, and but I never hear anybody ever talk about them. But they're just amazing. They just have this incredible kind of depth to them and grittiness to them, and just incredible films that I feel have always been underrated and underappreciated. And considering how huge vampire films are, in the genre. But when I saw Ryan Lowe's post about the about Habit, I was like, yeah, that's for me is that's where it's at. That's kind of the main reason I do this channel, where I try to bring light to films that are similar to what Larry Fenderson did, because of these a lot of films are just kind of forgotten about or over, they were maybe at one point they had a big push, or they had a great amount of exposure, but over time they kind of fell into obscurity, or they just went and they never had really reached a certain market. So that's kind of the point of this whole channel, is to try to bring light to films like that. For people that are really into horror and those kinds of genres, and also in the world of exploitation. Like, if you want to take that deep dive and check out the real old school stuff, where a lot of these things came from, also the origins of the genre itself. That's kind of what it's all about. The other thing, getting back to Larry Fenderson and Glass Eye Pix, he's become a big name, and he's also like I said, he's a director. He's done a bunch of very cool movies. He's mostly well known for being a producer through Glass Eye Pix, and he's also an actor. He's been in a few movies that are, he's always great in any of the films I've seen him in, and so he's just such an immersive person in the genre. One of his biggest discoveries is this director called Ty West, and Ty West now is pretty popular, pretty big name, and Larry Fenderson kind of worked with him when he was really young, and he's put out all of his movies since then. And Ty West recently, his last two movies, and probably his most well-known movie, and I think probably his best movie was X. That came out a couple of years ago, and that was a commercial hit. Still very much an independent film, and definitely an independent horror film. But I think I did a post about X last year, or actually it came out this year, and easily one of the best, I think, newer horror films I've seen in quite some time. And then there's also the prequel that just came out, which I haven't seen, and I've heard is really, really great, called Pearl. But Ty West came out of the Larry Fenderson camp, so that's a pretty, and I think Ty West arguably right now is one of the best horror film directors around. So that's testimony to the talent that Larry Fenderson has, and that he sees in other filmmakers and people who are in the independent horror industry. So very, very cool. So definitely check out anything by those guys if you get a chance. Especially Habit. Habit was the first thing I ever saw him involved in, and I was like, wow, like this is a really this is a very like special kind of movie, and I've never heard it ever talked about. I've never seen it make anyone's lists as far as vampire movies, because vampire movies are so, you know, such a huge genre, and the popularity for anything tied to vampires is just, remains kind of through the roof. Uh, I myself personally, I love vampire movies also. I mean, starting going back to when I was a kid and my exposure to all of the classic movies from like the late 50s, 60s, and 70s through Hammer Studios, the legendary British company that put out a whole slew of vampire movies starring Christopher Lee. Those were like the first vampire films I'd ever seen as a kid. So I've always been deeply, invested in that whole genre. Overall, I'm more of a fan of werewolf fan. I'm more of a werewolf fan of and werewolf movies. I just There's something about that whole world that I love a little bit more. The Howling and uh, American Werewolf in London, uh, The Beast and the Sword. So many great films. But anyway, so today's show I'm really excited about. This is a movie I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time, and for various reasons or whatever, because I've had lots of other reviews or the things that I've been getting to. I just haven't gotten to talk about this film. And this film, I think, a lot of the movies I do on this channel also are I'm a huge fan of the slasher horror exploitation world, and slasher films are probably my favorite. I can't get enough. To me, it's when I discover a movie, whether it's a brand new movie, but most of the time lately, it's always been about rediscovering movies when I was a kid on VHS, particularly around the slasher genre. That is easily probably like my favorite genre of horror. I just can't get enough of, like, to me, if you throw in a really good, well executed slasher movie, it's for me it's the ultimate. And so today's film is without exception easily one of the greatest slasher films ever made. My Bloody Valentine. This is a Canadian movie that came out in 1981. I got this. This is a movie too. I saw a bunch of times when I was a kid on VHS. I just got this steel box set about. Well, I actually got it this year, and it's just incredible. It's one of the best packages ever. The beautiful artwork on the front and also in the back. It's a beautiful package. Comes with 2 discs. It's got the movie My Bloody Valentine. It has a there's 2 versions of it too, which is really interesting. There's also a trimmed down version that's kind of more of the American version, and then there's the uncut director's version. And I haven't even really watched the American version. I typically, with a lot of these movies too, which I've been realizing more and more, with a lot of these films that I've been buying, especially this year, um, a lot of the times they come with two or three different versions of the same film. there's a movie I did a review on called Thriller, A Cruel Picture, which is just an amazing exploitation movie. I love it. I watched it again last night. And it's just, and that movie I had never seen before, and I just love that movie. It's like an action exploitation movie. It's a pretty brutal movie, but it's so highly stylized, super low budget. But it it comes with two discs, and there's one uncut version, and then there's an American version, and I believe it was and it's a Norwegian movie, so it's a foreign movie, and with subtitles. And there's two cuts on of the film, and one of the cuts I usually I've only watched the director's cut, and it's brutal and it's just amazing, and it's such a great story, great atmosphere, the whole thing. It's just an amazing movie. I had never seen it before, and then the other day, actually when I first got it, a few days afterwards, I started watching the uh, the theatrical release, the regular cut that had come out in theaters when that movie came out, and it was really different. It was kind of, I felt overall the film was kind of toned down. There were a lot of cuts made. Um, it's not as good. It wasn't as engaging, and it kind of lost the momentum that the uncut version kind of I felt it was really building. Um, it's not as gory, it's not as violent, and there are definitely scenes where they were kind of sanitized because it is an explicit. It's a very explicit movie. Um, so there's obviously that there were when the film was released there were big cuts made by the distributors because it could have gotten an X rating otherwise because there is sex. There's many sex scenes in the film, or actually rape scenes in the film where there is penetration shown, and so it kind of veers into the area where you can almost consider it to be pornography, even though it's not. It's it's when it gets it's an interesting movie because when it gets into that aspect of it, it feels like that's what it is because in the definition of as far as what I know, what when a film becomes known or seen or is marketed as pornography, it's usually because they show actual penetration, and this movie does that, even though it's not a porn per se. So it's an interesting, weird balance. And so the same thing with My Bloody Valentine. It comes with two cuts, and I've watched both cuts. And the same thing with the theatrical version. There's a lot less gore I found, and a little bit less cohesion. There's not that cohesive element that is in the uncut version for this. So it affects the story. It kind of breaks it up. It doesn't have that same kind of it doesn't build that same momentum. So I tip when and so when I've been buying a lot of these great horror exploitation movies. A lot of the times they come with two or three different versions, and I tend to always go to to watch. I always go for the uncut version overall, and it's always much better, obviously, because there isn't the factor of all of these cuts that were made through to the original theatrical release, and it really is, and I think it's great, with all of these amazing releases on Blu-ray for all of these just amazing movies. The I think it's such a great thing that these companies have been doing um, to really show what the directors had intended, and giving them you know like total legitimacy. Like now their visions can be these directors who've made these films. Their visions now can be fully seen and unhampered by any kind of censorship or cuts made by various distributors or various ratings boards and all those things. Like that's all garbage. And you know if you're an adult and you have access to material that's considered to be adult, you should be able to make up your own mind. You shouldn't have some kind of group of boards, guys with pens and notepads making decisions for you. It's like you should be able to make those decisions on your own as a consumer. But this movie to me is just amazing. I grew up watching this film, and yeah, easily one of my favorite slasher films. So when I got this on Blu-ray, I was so excited. It's definitely it's definitely one of the most suspenseful movies I've ever seen. I've talked about it a lot with films, as far as I've had this discussion with people online, and I've seen it in other forums and whatnot. But one movie and I brought it up before on this channel. Movies right now, well, one movie in particular that is this. It's basically like a tidal wave. It's just kind of making all this money, and it's a super low budget movie, but it's got all of this hype and all of this acclaim around it. And it's this movie called Terrifier 2. That's the sequel to Terrifier. Which stars Art the Clown, who is this psychotic clown that just goes around you know massacring people for 2 hours or whatever. And and then and that movie is one that I've seen so many posts about it online, on social media. It's crazy. On one hand, I think it's great, and I think it's awesome, because those films were pretty much self financed by people and fans. GoFundMe, I think, financed Terrifier 2. And so, on one hand, it's amazing that, a film that is made, because they're both incredibly low budget. I haven't seen Terrifier 2, but I've seen the first one. But the first one that I did see, is incredibly low budget, and it definitely harkens back to this classic, era of 70s and 80s, which is my favorite period of filmmaking. It's definitely super gritty. It's definitely super low budget, and total, kind of guerrilla style filmmaking. And Terrifier definitely harkens back to that period and that time. And I think the thing that's cool about it is it doesn't. I don't feel like they're trying to make it make the film a homage to that period of time in movie making. I think it legitimately comes from a sincere place. I think they made the film the way they did because they didn't have the budget, but I feel like, well, obviously the filmmakers behind that film were very much inspired by films like this and whatnot. But after seeing the first one, and I've talked about it before, I think the kills and everything were just brutal and pretty wild and crazy. But I felt like there wasn't a level of tension, and there wasn't any atmosphere after I saw that film. I liked it when I watched it. I was digging it. I watched it, and I don't usually watch movies online unless they're really really hard to find or whatnot. And if I hear about certain films over and over again, I will probably watch them online and check them out. But I generally don't like to do that. I like to usually get a physical DVD or Blu-ray copy and actually watch it with my surround sound system to really get a sense of what the movie is. And I watched it and I liked it, but then after, I was pretty taken aback by the kills. Like, it's brutal as all hell as far as that goes, but I was kind of taken. I just, after I watched it, I kind of just forgot about it. It just didn't have anything outside of the brutal kills. It felt like it didn't really have any of those elements that I love about these films. It didn't have the atmosphere. In this film, for me, or it didn't have the suspense. And this film has you know, this it's definitely a horror movie, and it's definitely 100% a slasher film. But if you took away the gore factor and the kills, like to me, it's almost like a Hitchcock film. It's got this whole heavy duty suspense element and some great characters and a great story. And it easily plays out like a thriller. But and also the atmosphere for this film is just so amazing. It's you can kind of it's so palatable that you can like almost taste it. It just it just oozes with that. And it was directed by Mahalka, George Mahalka, and it stars Paul Kellman, Laurie Haler, Neil Fleck. The music was by Paul Zaza, and it was released by Paramount, which is crazy. And it came out in 1981, and it's a straight up Canadian slasher movie. And it's amazing that this film had it was done for such little money. And I know when this film came out, it had success, but then it fell into, as far as I know, it fell into a big level of obscurity. It just was forgotten about, and then over time, there there was this cult following that developed, and I believe this is the disc. It's got amazing an amazing bonus disc on here of special features and interviews with the director, um, and all of the people involved, and I believe there's an interview on here where they interview one of the actors, and they basically felt that the movie, after they had done the movie, they kind of forgot about what they had about the movie. They the years had passed and they moved on and they did other things, moved into even different careers, not even in film anymore, and really involved in films anymore. And they all of a sudden, years and years go by, they get these messages and emails from random people who were fans of My Bloody Valentine, and these people were basically saying, how much this movie means to them. They think it's one of the greatest movies ever, and suddenly this wave kind of came, and they, over a period of time, the cast was, reunited, and they were doing all of these horror conventions, and there was all this acclaim, and and that led to this movie getting re-released, and it's just amazing, and considering where they felt, they kind of wrote it off at one time, as that was the thing that they did, and it just fell into obscurity. It was a fun, great experience, but then they just felt like, okay, it's probably over. And then there was this big resurgence, and this cult following, and now, like, so many years later, it's like regarded as one of the greatest classics. I think it's I did a show a couple weeks ago on Bill Lustig's Maniac, and that's probably my favorite horror slasher exploitation movie of all time. I just love that movie. But this is a close tie. My Bloody Valentine. This movie is just so darn good. There's a whole interesting thing too, where it takes place in a coal mining shaft, and the other thing too that is so great about this film and gives it such a realism is they're actually in real locations, and they actually used a real coal mining shaft, in, I believe, is in Nova Scotia. And there's a really funny story with the director, and he was talking about how, with George Mihalka, the director, he was talking about how when they found the location, that they were scouting out this idea, the premise of the story was to basically create this slasher film that was going to take place in this coal mining shaft. They found a location, and it was a real place. So they approached the owners in the town about using it for the film, and it was really run down. It was actually an actual shaft that was used, and the town proceeded to basically go in and clean everything up, and they made it into this like pristine, almost like it took on this museum like quality. And they said that they, so when the filmmakers, when they all showed up to actually start shooting, they couldn't believe what happened, and they had to spend all this money and all this time basically making the place look like it had been lived in again, and that it was, and they wanted it to be really raw and dirty and nasty. So they spent all this time and money and effort trying to repurpose it, which I thought was really funny, because these people, out of the kindness of letting them use this place as for their shoot, they decided to clean everything and make it as sanitary as possible. But this whole film was shot in a real coal mining shaft, and they were, the hardships that they suffered of trying to get their cameras down in these areas, in these dark areas, and also the ventilation problems that they had, and also just the dangerous elements that they had to deal with making this film. They legitimately at times put their lives in risk at risk to make this film, and so for me it really shows on screen, because it's so real. You're actually at this location, and the level. And again, like I said, if you took away the gore factor and the slasher elements, it's very much, it plays like a thriller, and the atmosphere for this film is just so great. I mean, the last 25 minutes of this film is just pretty harrowing, and the kills are amazing. Definitely, the killer in this film is definitely one of my favorite, one of my all-time favorite mass killers. I feel like he's right up there with Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and Leatherface. I mean, for me he's equal, and he always has the mask on, the oxygen mask, and he always has this, like, he wears all black, and he has this giant pickaxe that he uses to kill people. And the ending is just fantastic. Such a great movie. Can't say enough good things. And this movie also, there's a lot of great filmmakers that have come out over the years, especially around this time, out of Canada. David Cronenberg, for instance, probably the most well known. I did a film review. He's one of my favorite directors of all time. I did a review of his one of his first films, Shivers. He's a Canadian-based director. I did another review of another amazing movie, another exploitation movie called The Siege, which is just such a damn good movie. That's also Canadian. And then there's also this one, which I feel is, there's a lot of great films that came out of Canada during that time in the 70s and 80s, and particularly in the horror exploitation world. And there's a whole slew of other people that were involved with various other films. But I think that this movie really put Canada on the map, as far as there's some real talent in Canada as the country. Kind of was not known for horror for a very long time. It was mostly American. Most of the horror exploitation world at the time was, obviously in Italy and Europe, mostly in Italy. Lucio Fulci and Bruno Mattei and Dario Argento. That was probably the biggest kind of area for that. And then also throughout Europe, and then also in America with guys like Bill Lustig and Herschel Gordon Lewis, and a whole slew of other American directors. But so Canada wasn't really known to have that kind of thing either. They weren't known to have those kinds of films, or known for to have exploitation movies that would come out and that were good. So I feel like this one definitely put Canada on the map, and yeah, to me it's one of the greatest movies ever. So My Bloody Valentine, 1981. If you get a chance, please see this movie. I think it's such a great movie that even if you're not a fan of, because I know people who don't like slasher movies at all. I know sometimes it can be a thing of where it's a particular kind of style or maybe a certain kind of mood you need to be into. I know a lot of people personally or friends that are not into movies that are very gory. They like films that tend to be maybe on this more of a suspense level. If they're horror movies, they get turned off. They don't have a stomach for gore or whatnot. I understand that, but I feel like this movie is one of those movies that bridges that gap. Like if you're not, if you haven't really seen too many slasher films, and you have reservations because I don't really want to see people getting butchered left and right. I don't I'm not really into that. Um, I kind of feel like My Bloody Valentine would be definitely the movie to uh, as an introduction to like to check out if you've never seen a slasher movie. This would be like kind of the best introduction, I think, because of it's got all these other elements and it really plays out like a thriller and it's so well done and it's so well crafted and it has such great atmosphere. So I feel like it has so much of those other attributes that it for someone who is not necessarily into this genre, this particular genre, they would probably dig it. I think it follows a lot in to me it reminds me of Hitchcock. It has those kinds of suspenseful elements, and definitely Hitchcock was obviously a huge influence. So it this could be that gateway movie for people who don't necessarily like slasher movies. But again, this is Jason Dean. Can't say enough good things about this movie. This movie totally rocks. Now that I'm talking about it again, I kind of want to watch it, so I'm gonna probably watch it. So this is Jason Dean. I hope everyone has a great Turkey Day, and we'll see you next time. And if you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. Peace.